confirmed yesterday. A reminder that Oklahoma and Texas will be headed to the SEC in 2025. So some huge shifts happening in college sports, and it could just be the beginning. The Big Ten just got bigger. Here's what the conference will look like in 2024. The addition of the Trojans and the Bruins make it 16 teams in total. So the Big Ten is set to become the only FBS conference with schools in both the Eastern and Pacific time zones. So let's chat about this with the mouth of the South, Paul Feinbaum, joining us now. And Paul, I'm going to start with you here because this is it's just chaos. Is it surprising? Is this move surprising at all?
Yes. And anyone tells you that it's not would not pass a lie detector test. What's so fascinating is about last August, after the SEC made its move with Oklahoma and Texas, the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12 formed what they called an alliance. They said we won't do what happened in the Big 12 and the SEC. We're not robber barons. We're gentlemen. We looked each other in the eye, and guess what? Kevin Warren he's a Big Ten commissioner. He put a knife in the backs of the commissioners of the other two leagues. Now, he didn't really do it. What happened was UCLA and especially USC said, you know what? We have no shot playing in the Pac-12. It's a failed conference. Everything about it is wrong. And we're going to look around, and they found the most convenient conference that's located in Chicago, only about 2,500 miles away. And here we are. And for all of and I just want you guys to think the next time Freddie and the rest of you are sitting around listening to a college administrator talk about the most important thing is the student athlete and he or she, we want to make sure they get to class on time. If you're an athlete in Southern California, you get to get on a plane, whether it's basketball or football or softball or track, and fly all the way to Piscataway, New Jersey. Freddie, you know where that is. I couldn't find it or spell it, but that's what we're talking about here.
Oh,
sounds
man.
awful.
My goodness.
To Paul's point, like, we all should be surprised about this. I mean, anybody who saw this coming, I don't know if you can really, I don't know if anybody really falls in that category, but realistically, there's been a ton of conference realignment going on over the last couple of years that it felt like, well, we may not have been able to project that UCLA and USC were going to do what they did on the heels of 4th of July, that college football was headed towards this two-conference, super conference sort of dynamic, in where this kind of feels like it's the English Premier League, where you've got that group and then all of the lesser leagues within it. So I'm not surprised that this sort of manifest destiny is going on in college football right now. The fact is, this has been trending this way for a while. And if you're USC, you're not afraid to make these sort of cutthroat moves and do what you need to do in order to have the most success. They did it in poaching Lincoln Riley from Oklahoma. They haven't been to the college football playoff since 2016. They look at themselves in the Pac-12 right now and realize, we're kind of in a league that do we know, does this league care about the college football playoff and being competitive? Like, their best chance now is to get into a place where the TV deals are seismic in their own right. And what we're hearing are these TV deals for UCLA and USC could be north of $100 million. Think about what that means when you add that into the giant pot that is the Big Ten Conference and their media deals. And I am not surprised about this one element. Remember the Big Ten media rights deals that was supposed to happen in May, and there was kind of this weird sort of silence around it about what's going on here?
Now we know why.
I think we know why now.
That makes sense, yeah. That makes sense.
One of the things Paul and I have known each other for years, and the one thing he's always told me, he said, Freddie, all you got to do is follow the money, and it always tells the truth. When Oklahoma and Texas can be frenemies and join the league, no one should be surprised that the West Coast frenemies, USC and UCLA, decide to join forces. And Paul, that's one thing I want to stress in terms of what next now? Because it all fouls the Notre Dame from this standpoint. Oklahoma, Texas going to the SEC, USC, UCLA going to the Big Ten. What now for Notre Dame, who still wants to be Notre Dame U and have their own conference? And I wonder how much that can be feasible when it comes to football.
Well, let's start with a couple of things about Notre Dame. They're so important to have their own network, NBC, which runs out in 2025. They have this utterly bizarre relationship with the ACC. They play in every sport but hockey and football. Now, football is only the biggest sport, and if they withdraw from the ACC, they'll pay a penalty, but they can get out. Now, if you studied 7th grade geography, you say to yourself, why isn't Notre Dame in the Big Ten? Notre Dame is practically a suburb of Chicago, where the Big Ten headquarters. But there's a lot of bad blood. It goes way back, even before I was born, Freddie, and so they don't really like the Big Ten. So what happens now? Either the ACC figures out some way to get them in, of which I don't know how they do at this point, since Notre Dame has resisted everything. They played in the ACC during COVID and went to the playoffs.
Yep.
Or they bite the bullet and join the Big Ten. Or guess what? That Notre Dame says, we like the SEC. That's where the action is. We'll come down there. It sounds implausible, but in college football right now, nothing is implausible.
I get the sense we're going to have just like 2 big super conferences.
Oh, yeah.
That seems to be where this is going, where you got to fief them over here, you got to fief them over there. It's going to lead to an 18 playoff, maybe a 16-team playoff. And I know there are plenty of old heads, Paul, that are looking at this day as a day that will live in infamy, that we don't have these rivalries in these conferences and everybody is separating. We better get used to that from the standpoint of this is where the future of college football is going to go, because there's way too much money out there for people to go back in time to say our sheepskin is better than your sheepskin and go back to the rivalries that happened that made college football so special.
And Freddie, think about this for a second. Biggest rivalry in college basketball history, Duke and North Carolina. It's possible that if Notre Dame doesn't end up in the SEC, and it's certainly they're not a favorite to, Clemson says, you know what, we're tired of holding the ACC on our back. We're heading to the SEC, and we need a partner. And their partner may be the University of North Carolina. Can you imagine North Carolina telling Duke, see you later, guys. Now that Coach K is gone, we're heading to the SEC. But it makes sense. They're a very attractive product. And then you have Miami and Florida State going, what about me? And they all can't join, because the SEC is struggling right now to figure out how to get Oklahoma and Texas in. They can probably take 2 more. Maybe 2 more after that, but you know, there these 26, 30 team leagues. We saw how that worked in the ACC, how it hasn't worked in the ACC, going from Miami to Boston College and Syracuse. So you have to be smart, but it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen very quickly, especially with the Pac-12 teams. A couple like Oregon and Washington going, we're out of here too, and then you have those other 3 conferences: the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12, looking for literally table scraps.
Man.
And doesn't it kind of feel like we were headed this way because there were conferences and colleges individually that were trying to figure out a way to combat the SEC's hold on college football? Did we really think that these schools were going to be able to work together under the guise of not poaching each other's member institutions? Like, I just wonder, like, will George Kliavkoff ever answer a phone call from Kevin Warren again after this whole thing, this gentleman's agreement, went out the window on Thursday with the addition of UCLA and USC to the Big Ten? Like, I got to wonder about Notre Dame, though, Paul, and I wanted to ask you about this because their athletics budget, as we know, the last couple of years has become like super strained. Is there any other way for them to fix that than by joining the Big Ten?
Well, I mean, Notre Dame could pull a surprise and actually back up their creed and code and say, we care more about academics than anything else. I don't believe they will. I've been to games at Notre Dame, and I see everyone up there talking out of both sides of their mouth. I mean, Brian Kelly was the most successful coach in Notre Dame history. He just left because he couldn't beat the big time teams. He couldn't beat Clemson. He couldn't beat Alabama. So he went to the SEC. So I think that's a roadmap. And relationships matter too. And the athletic director at Notre Dame, Jack Swarbrick, and Greg Sankey are close friends. They worked together. They were part of a 4-person team that tried to give us a 12-team college football playoff a year ago, but that didn't go over because the ACC and the Big Ten and the Pac-12 didn't think they needed it. They probably think they need it now. So that's the most intriguing part of this. But ultimately at Notre Dame, the president at Notre Dame makes the final decision, and that is the ultimate wild card in all of this.
There is also a very important point, because since Notre Dame's other sports are in the ACC, Notre Dame would have to as a football team, join the ACC or take their entire sports league or sports teams out of the ACC, pay a fine. So like you're talking about how strained they were financially. I feel like that would make it even worse.
But the only way to remedy that would be to join either the SEC or the Big Ten.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Or
Okay.
have the best Venmo account ever when it comes to Notre Dame.
You didn't know we had all this money. It's in my Venmo account. Paul, I do want to ask you, because obviously this is a big move, and it was a big move last